Thank you. And good morning. Welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Ann Arbor, Michigan. I'm the Reverend Cassandra Hartley, and I have the honor of serving this congregation as executive minister. I'm joined this morning by the Reverend Manish Mishra-Marzetti, our senior minister, the Reverend Theresa Rohlck, our congregation's chaplain and the director of the handbell choir, the Chalice Bells, of course, the wonderful members of the Chalice Bells themselves, Stella Anderson, our acting director of spiritual growth and development, Allison Halerz, our pianist-in-residence, Mike Halerz, our technology consultant, and countless other staff and volunteers who come together each week to make our time together possible. If you're new to our community, thank you for trusting us with the gift of your time and presence. We hope you'll join us after the service for a Newcomers Welcome, which is in the Jackson Chapel just outside these doors on the right. It's a wonderful chance to meet other congregants and staff, ask questions, and make new connections. If you're online and new, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. And we also invite you to take a Newcomer Survey, which will help us to get to know you better and help us to connect you more deeply to the community. You can just go to UUAA.org/Newcomer Survey. Of course, whether you're a newcomer or a long-timer or something in between, whether you're here in person watching or online, whether you live down the street or across the world, welcome to you all. It's almost unbelievable to think that 2 years ago at this time, our congregation was making the previously unthinkable decision to close our doors. I'll never forget the first time I got to go back into the building after a few weeks just to grab some supplies for my office. I saw children's paintings that had been left to dry in the classrooms, but now sat unclaimed and forgotten. Posters for events that never got to happen still covered the bulletin boards. Orders of services for our last service, which we didn't know was our last service, were still in our recycling bins. Name tags sat unused in their holders. I could only cry at all that had been lost, seemingly overnight. There was no clear end in sight. And yet, even amidst the grief, there was also joy and hope. Our congregation has been gathering week after week for over 155 years, so we weren't going to let even a global pandemic stop us. We quickly shifted online and began experimenting with new ways of worshiping and staying connected. We sewed masks and signed up to be quarantine phone buddies. We shared pictures and check-ins on social media. We went on walks. We made the phrase, sorry, you're still muted, a regular part of our vocabulary. We stepped day by day into an ever-changing reality. This month, as we explore the theme of faith, we reflect on what faith has meant in the midst of a pandemic, how we've moved through the past 2 years, both as individuals and as a community, what has sustained us, and what will continue to sustain us. So let us move deeper now into that time of reflection. We are gathered for worship.
Good morning. Good morning. As we prepare to light this chalice here in the sanctuary, I invite any of you watching the live stream who may have a chalice or a candle nearby to have it ready. And if you are willing, in a few moments, add to the chat words that indicate you have lit your chalice. You might write, "The chalice is lit in Ypsilanti, Michigan," or "The chalice is lit in Mesa, Arizona," or however you want to identify your location. The Flaming Chalice was created during World War II for the Unitarian Service Committee, who needed an official logo for their letterhead and other documents as they worked to rescue and move to safety those who were being persecuted by the Nazis. The Flaming Chalice eventually became a symbol of this faith tradition. So as we light this chalice today, let's reflect on how, in many ways, the world events that made the creation of a chalice logo necessary are still today frighteningly present. Let's reflect on what our faith in action looks like. I invite Lori McLean, one of the founding members of the Handbells, to light this chalice in this space and invite you from other spaces to do the same. And let's say our chalice lighting words together. In faith, this light will continue to call us to the work of justice. So please join me in the words. We light this chalice for the light of truth. We light this chalice for the warmth of love. We light this chalice for the energy of action. We light this chalice for the harmony of peace. Thank you. The chalice is lit in Ann Arbor, Michigan. The faith I just mentioned, faith in each other to do the justice work we as a congregation are committed to doing, is also for me directly tied to our covenant. We are a covenantal faith, not a creedal faith. And when I speak this covenant each week, I know you are doing the same, and I know as a community, we understand we are in relationship with each other, and what affects one affects the whole. So we covenant to do our very best to embody these words, and when we fall short, we know we can return in love to this covenant. Join me with intention as we say these words together. The spirit of this church is love, and service is its law. This is our covenant with each other, to dwell together in peace, to search for truth in love, and to help one another.
As we continue our exploration of faith, I want to share a beautiful story that Stella found for us. It's called The Year We Learned to Fly by Jacqueline Woodson, illustrated by Rafael Lopez. And it's a beautiful illustration of what it means to get through times of uncertainty and change. That was the year we learned to fly. That was the spring when the rain seemed like it would never stop, and the thunder boomed so hard we weren't allowed to go outside. Use those beautiful and brilliant minds of yours, my grandmother said. Lift your arms, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and believe in a thing. Somebody somewhere at some point was just as bored as you are now. So my brother and I closed our eyes, and for a few minutes that first day, we weren't stuck in our apartment anymore. We were flying over the city we'd known our whole lives, but it was suddenly different, exploding with every kind of flower we'd ever dreamed of growing. That was the summer we learned to fly, when my brother and I couldn't stop fussing with each other over whose turn it was to wash the windows, to feed the dog, to clean the kitchen. We fought and frowned and made silent promises to never speak to each other ever again. My grandmother said, "Lift your arms, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and stop being so mean about everything. Somebody somewhere at some point was just as mad as you are now." So we did, and as the soft wind took us out over the city and past the windows of kids who hadn't yet learned to fly, my brother and I reached for each other's hand, flying and diving and laughing and leaving all of our mad far behind us. That was the autumn our rooms felt too big and lonely with only us in them, and and the darkness coming on so fast. But while we hugged ourselves against the too quiet of it all, we remembered that we didn't have to be stuck anywhere anymore. My grandmother had learned to fly from the people who came before. They were aunts and uncles and cousins who were brought here on huge ships, their wrists and ankles cuffed in iron. But, my grandmother said, nobody can ever cuff your beautiful and brilliant mind. So our people learned to fly, she said. They dreamed a thing and made it happen, closed their eyes and flew away home. Lift your arms, my grandmother said. Close your eyes and remember somebody somewhere at some point had to figure out they could fly. That was the winter we moved away from the building and the block and the friends we'd always known. To a street where the kids looked at us funny and didn't even answer when we asked them if they wanted to play. It's okay, I said to my brother. Somebody somewhere at some point had to figure out they were ready for any new thing coming their way. So, like the people who came before us, we lifted our arms even higher, closed our eyes even tighter, breathed in even deeper, and flew the way we'd always known how to, free as the aunties and uncles and cousins who'd come before us, free as our own beautiful and brilliant minds. For a long time, the kids on the ground watched us. Then, one by one, they lifted their arms. One by one, they too learned to fly. The end.
Sorrow prepares you for joy. It violently sweeps everything out of your house so that new joy can find space to enter. It shakes the yellow leaves from the bough of your heart so that fresh green leaves can grow in their place. It pulls up the rotten roots so that new roots hidden beneath have room to grow. Whatever sorrow shakes from your heart, far better things will take their place. So wrote the Persian poet Rumi. For over a week now, I've been participating in a UU Lent spiritual practice. Every day from Ash Wednesday through Easter Sunday, I reflect on a chosen word and post a picture inspired by that word on social media. It's been a really transformative practice. Something as simple as a daily reflection has inspired me to live more fully into compassion and grace. On day 7, the word was grief. So I wrote about my mom, who died when she was only 43, the same age that I am now. I wrote about how much I yearn for more memories of her as a healthy, vibrant person before cancer stole her away. How my unprocessed grief is still palpable 35 years later. Comedian Patton Oswalt, reflecting on the death of his wife, told Stephen Colbert, "If you don't talk about it, then grief really gets to set up and fortify its positions inside of you and begin to immobilize you. But the more you talk, the more you expose it to the air and the light, then grief doesn't have a chance to organize itself. And then you can maybe move on a little better and a little easier." My family didn't talk about it. We didn't talk about her. We let grief organize itself within each of us. I kept my pain tucked away. I never wanted to be a burden. I never wanted to make my father sad. So I never asked for help, even though I was drowning. I tried to pretend that I was fine, and life carried on. It's taken a lifetime for me to learn that grief will manifest itself. I know what happens when you try to run or hide. It finds you. And unless you allow yourself to feel it, grief will paralyze you. It will challenge your faith in everything. As psychotherapist and grief expert Dr. Kenneth Doka writes, there is little work more difficult than working through grief. Our world is awash in grief and loss. In our own country, the numbers are staggering. According to Ed Yong in The Atlantic, every American who died of COVID left an average of 9 close relatives bereaved. Roughly 9 million people, 3% of the population, now have a permanent hole in their world that was once filled by a parent, child, sibling, spouse, or grandparent. An estimated 149,000 children have lost a parent or caregiver. Many people were denied the familiar rituals of mourning, bedside goodbyes, in-person funerals. Others are grieving raw and recent losses, their grief trampled amid the stampede toward normal. I remember the day that changed everything. March 12th, 2020, when COVID was starting to explode in New York. We were all feeling anxious. Toilet paper was hard to find. The NBA season shut down indefinitely, and Tom Hanks tested positive for what we then called the coronavirus. I drove my oldest daughter to the bus stop and then headed to the gym as usual. After dropping my twins at the childcare, I walked onto an eerily quiet, nearly empty fitness floor. With every minute that went by, the voice in my head saying, "I shouldn't be here," got louder and louder, until finally I grabbed my coat and my kids and left. I haven't been back. Hearing that story, you might be surprised to know that I had been predicting a shutdown for weeks. I'm fascinated by the history of medicine, and I taught my social studies students about the 1918 flu, among other pandemics. So by the time March rolled around, my household was already well stocked up on groceries and other supplies. I remember telling a skeptical friend that we were probably facing 18 months to 2 years of disruption. I'm not saying this as some sort of boast, but simply to point out that my mind and my heart were in different places. Even knowing what was coming, there I was going about my life, pretending that everything was fine. Some people might call it hoping for the best, but expecting the worst. Honestly, though, I was just afraid of facing what I knew was coming. And then the schools shut down, workplaces closed, events were canceled, and overnight, the world that we knew had ruptured. It was like time suddenly stood still and the future turned dark. I'm sure all of you remember that first month. Desperate to keep things as normal as possible, while also trying to reckon honestly with the unknown danger all around us. We were walking and talking contradictions. How do you make quarantine fun? In my house, we created a daily routine on a poster board with glitter and stickers that we named Camp Corona, complete with outside time, reading time, free play time, snack time, craft time, and screen time. We used songs to teach proper hand washing techniques. We ordered cloth masks on Etsy. We created text chains with all the people we love. We baked bread. We had Facebook Messenger playdates and Zoom happy hours. We created friend pods. We clapped for healthcare workers. We watched Tiger King on Netflix. And then weeks turned into months. New variants created new waves. Vaccines offered an end, until they didn't. Misinformation and distrust proliferated, and so on and so on. At the beginning, we were all scared. 2 years later, we're still scared, but we're also numb and angry and suspicious and exhausted, divided more than ever, desperate for space to breathe, yearning to smile and laugh again. Are we really surprised that even as we approach 1 million American deaths from COVID, the U.S. is making a conscious decision to forget, that we are choosing not to reckon with the scope and scale of our losses? I turn once again to Ed Yong, who writes, "Thinking about it is like staring into the sun, and after 2 years, it is no wonder people are looking away. As tragedy becomes routine, excess deaths feel less excessive. Levels of suffering that once felt like thunderclaps now resemble a metronome's clicks, the background noise against which everyday life plays." We did the same thing in 1920. We wanted to move on without a reckoning. History is repeating itself before our eyes. On paper, my family's made it through these 2 years relatively unscathed. We don't know anyone that died or was hospitalized. My spouse's job is secure, and I returned to the workforce. We had the flexibility and resources to stay home and do remote school. We had access to quality masks and vaccines. My family came down with COVID last month, but it was pretty mild, and we've all fully recovered. I should be grateful for how fortunate I am. And yet, my heart feels heavy from the trauma of these 2 years. I know I'm not alone. Dr. Doka calls this disenfranchised grief, a loss that's not openly acknowledged, socially mourned, or publicly supported. Every one of us has experienced loss, and these losses deserve affirmation and compassion. Some of us have lost social connections. Some have lost solitude. We've lost opportunities to travel and to have adventures. We've lost joys, small and large. We've lost faith in our institutions, in our neighbors, even within our families. We've lost what sociologist Emil Durkheim calls collective effervescence, the sense of energy and harmony people feel when they come together in a group around a shared purpose. Our kids are not okay. Their losses are incomprehensible. How do we make up for months of remote school, the loss of social emotional learning, the lack of friend connections? So many of our kids are suffering from depression and anxiety and loneliness. And perhaps worst of all, they have lost their faith in us to protect them in body, mind, and spirit. I've heard the refrain that kids are resilient. I've said it myself. Is that just wishful thinking? A way to avoid confronting the hard work of healing ahead? My youngest daughter got sick with COVID first. She tried to hide it from us. When the test came back positive and we broke the news to her, she panicked. Suddenly, this invader that we had taught her to fear was in our house, and it was in her little body. As much as we tried to reassure her that vaccines gave her protection and COVID is usually mild in kids, I saw the terror in her eyes. She didn't know what to believe anymore, and I had no answers. Most bittersweet was her concern for the rest of us. She's only 6. She obviously couldn't isolate without a parent, but when I told her that I'd be sleeping in her room, she wept and said, "But what if I give you COVID, Mommy?" It broke my heart that this little person felt like she had to protect me. We know that grief can lead to a crisis of faith, especially grief left to fester and grow. But we also know that if we shine a light on grief, allow it to move through our bodies and minds and spirits, that we can find a renewed, reimagined faith in each other. It's difficult. It's painful. It can feel bottomless and endless. But healing is possible. We have to fight the impulse to hide it away, to push through and carry on, to forget. Much like the children in the year we learned to fly, who remembered the pain and grief and determination of their ancestors and were inspired to imagine a better world, we too can choose a new way forward together. As UU religious educator Theresa Youngblood writes, "When connections fray and trust decays, may our most loving and lasting friendships, our most dedicated mentors, and our cherished families restore our belief that others too are doing the best they can in a hurt and hurting world. And when we feel despair, loneliness, hopelessness, overwhelm, and fear, when chaos swirls within and around us, may we find faith straight ahead, and may we be received with joy by the company we find there." The first spring storm is coming soon. Not this one. The skies will darken, the clouds will open, and the rain will fall. There might be thunder and lightning, strong gusts of wind, even hail. And then the sun will break through the darkness, shine into the remnants of falling rain, and give us the gift of a rainbow. Let us rejoice in that rainbow, for it represents hope and healing and compassion and love and renewed faith in ourselves and each other. May it be so.
I invite you to join me now in a time of meditation or reflection. Let us take a few moments to get comfortable wherever you're at. Do what makes you feel grounded and safe. Let's take a few deep breaths together. I want to begin by sharing a poem by Amanda Gorman entitled At First, from her poetry collection, Call Us What We Carry. This poem is about the pandemic, and it's written as a series of text messages. As you listen, I invite you to notice what words, phrases, or images stand out for you. There were no words for what we witnessed. When we talked to each other, our sentences were stilted and stalled as a telegram. Hope we are doing well, as we can be, in all these times, unprecedented and unprecedented. When asking how others were faring, we did not expect an honest or full response. What words can answer how we are remaining alive? We became paid professionals of pain, specialists in suffering, aces of the ache, masters of the moan. March shuddered into a year, sloshing with millions of lonely, an overcrowded solitude. We pray there will never be such a precise and peopled pain as this. We began to lose words as trees forget their leaves in fall. The language we spoke had no place for excited, eager, laughter, joy, friend, get together. The phrases that remained were their own violence. That was sick. Ha, we're dead. We are deceased. To try is to take a stab, to take a shot. We want to find who made us a slaughterhouse, a rhetoric that works in red. We teach children, leave a mark on the world. What leads a man to shoot up souls but the desire to mark up the globe, to scar it and thus make it his intention to be remembered, even if for a ragged wreckage. Kids, unmark this place. Leave it nothing like the one we left behind. Sorry for the long text. There are no small words in the mouth. We find the rhetoric of reunion by letting love reclaim our tongues, the tip of the teeth. Our hearts have always been in our throats. Let's take a minute of silence now to reflect on what came up for you as you listened. How did it connect to your experience of the pandemic these last 2 years? As you reflect back, what memories, emotions, or physical sensations come up from that time? Let us join in silence now. Let us return from the silence. And I'm going to read the poem another time. And I ask you once again to just listen for what resonates or doesn't resonate for you at first. There were no words for what we witnessed. When we talked to each other, our sentences were stilted and stalled as a telegram. Hope we are doing well, as we can be, in all these times, unprecedented and unprecedented. When asking how others were faring, we did not expect an honest or full response. What words can answer how we're remaining alive? We became paid professionals of pain, specialists in suffering, aces of the ache, masters of the moan. March shuddered into a year, sloshing with millions of lonely, an overcrowded solitude. We pray there will never be such a precise and peopled hurt as this. We began to lose words as trees forget their leaves in fall. The language we spoke had no place for excited, eager, laughter, joy, friend, get together. The phrases that remained were their own violence. That was sick. We're dead. We are deceased. To try is to take a stab, to take a shot. We want to find who made us a slaughterhouse, a rhetoric that works in red. We teach children, leave a mark on the world. What leads a man to shoot up souls but the desire to mark up the globe, to scar it and thus make it his intention to be remembered, even if for a ragged wreckage. Kids, unmark this place. Leave it nothing like the one we left behind. Sorry for the long text. There are no small words in the mouth. We find the rhetoric of reunion by letting love reclaim our tongues, the tip of the teeth. Our hearts have always been in our throats. Let us take a final moment of shared silence, and this time I invite you to reflect on what you want to take from the past 2 years as we move into whatever comes next. What lessons, habits, insights, memories do you want to carry forward? What are your hopes when you look ahead? Let us join in silence.
On March 11, 2020, at 7:27 p.m., an email I helped craft went out to the 140 plus who had signed up for the Big Sing. It began, "Dear friends, the Big Sing 2020 will not be held this weekend, March 14, 15. We make this decision with considerable regret and hope you'll know we have made this decision in care for the health of the community and its people." 2 years ago, we canceled the March 15 worship service. We canceled the March 21st auction. And so our time of pandemic began. It was a sudden and dramatic beginning to what was to unfold over the next 2 years. It has been a time of grief, loss, sacrifice, unimaginable numbers of deaths in the US and across the world. What has sustained us, supported us, held us throughout? There will be as many answers to that as there are people answering it. But here we are, 2 full years later. I would venture that for many, this community has been and still is one of the things that has sustained, supported, and held us throughout it all, throughout the 1.5 years of recorded worship services, throughout the times of isolation and lockdown, the eternal presence of Zoom screens, work and school from home, the masks. And I want to thank you, all of you, who have continued to financially support this congregation throughout it all when jobs and paychecks were not guaranteed. And thank those who returned with financial support when it was possible. And thank you also for having faith and trust in this worship team, this congregation staff and lay leadership, knowing they are strong and creative and dedicated to caring for the health of the community, even when it means making hard decisions, like canceling a Big Sing and requiring masks. I remain hopeful we will sing together again soon. We will auction together again soon. We will continue to do all the things we do together in person again soon. Because your continued financial support will make it possible. You may leave checks or cash in the baskets at the back of the sanctuary, or text UUAA to 73256. Or go to uuaa.org/giving. Today's offering will now be gratefully received. Thank you for your generosity. If you would rise in body or spirit as you are able, and say with me the words we use to dedicate our offering. To the work of this congregation, which is weaving a tapestry of love and action, we dedicate our lives and these our offerings. Thank you. You may have a seat.
A poem by Amanda Gorman from her book, Call Us What We Carry. This is a piece that uses the mythology of Pandora's box. For those who may not know, the story is contained in an ancient Greek work, a piece of literature called Works and Days by Hesiod. It dates back to 700 BC, and this work, this piece is actually a farmer's almanac, and it was a farmer's almanac that was written at a time of agrarian crisis in Greece. And as such, it contains moralistic stories that were intended to support people and help them in the middle of what was a significant crisis for their nation. This piece is called Pan. Pandemic, meaning all people. Pandemonium, meaning all demon. Pandora, meaning all gifted. Pan, meaning God of nature. All people have meaning, all are demon, all gifted. It is in our divine nature. We now appreciate that Pandora's box was a jar left ajar, a pithos, meaning a storage container for grain, oil, wheat, and even the dead. We all need places to lay down our grief. Where else to put it? That vessel held all plague, all pain, and all hope. Don't panic. Instead, turn to a companion. What are we if not the curiosity to open the coffins we carry? Who are we if not all the things we let loose? Pandora's box, not actually a box, a mistranslation. The Greek word that's used in the story is pithos. It's not a box, it's a vessel, similar to an urn, a large urn. And in this, grain could be stored, oil, even cremains. The myth tells us that Pandora opens this pithos, this vessel, and immediately flies out all manner of things, sickness, death, all kinds of ills immediately escape. And as she notices this, she immediately tries to cover it back up to close the vessel. But we're told in the story that the only thing that remains is, in the Greek word of it, elpis. In the popular version of the mythology, the contemporary version, what we're told what's left is hope. The word elpis, the Greek word elpis, can actually mean a continuum of things, which include hope, expectation, but also deceptive expectation, the hope or expectation that can deceive us. Pandora opens the vessel. And what Gorman tells us is this: that vessel held all plague, all pain, and all hope. Don't panic. Instead, turn to a companion. What are we if not the curiosity to open the coffins we carry? Who are we if not all the things we let loose? The box, the vessel is opened, and everything is laid bare. All the things that we are let loose. Those early days of the pandemic, evoked such fear in me. I don't know that I even have the words to convey to you the depth of what that fear was and the intensity with which I felt it. Fear, like the emotion of grief that Stella referred to, is another emotion that will build up structures around it, that will amplify itself when it is avoided, when it is not tended to, when we don't lend it our careful presence. Fear will build up things to support it. And here I was, feeling this intense fear, uncertainty, anxiety, just as many of you, I dare say, maybe even all of us, were feeling. But I'm in a helping profession, so I could build up these structures around this fear that I didn't even know why it was really there. Hey, everybody else is as afraid as I am. This is the time. I signed up with the universe, as did all of us in helping professions, to show up as love, compassion, caring at the hardest times of life. When to show up, if not now? So I could avoid that fear of my own. Press the pause button on it. Why look at it? It's not relevant right now. Everybody else is so full of need. Could even justify saying to my husband, you go out to the grocery store, so many hundreds of people are needing support right now. I don't know, can I afford to get sick? I don't know. Maybe that's not the best idea, right? You go. So selfless of me. You go, sweetie. So he did. And as I could lend some time and presence, and it took time, to what was arising in me, I could begin to draw the connections and remember those days in the early 90s when I was just 20 years old, newly out of the closet, and immediately the first thing I was confronted of was the need to survive a disease, not die from it. But even in the process of that, watching people around me constantly dying and getting sick. An experience that was not culturally supported. We were just handed condoms and said, stay alive. There was no processing, emotional support, spiritual support. We were simply told, stay alive. Do your best. Stay alive. And so all of that unprocessed fear and anxiety immediately resurfaced in the experience of another invisible disease, and you don't know who has it, who doesn't have it. What moment of abandon, of lack of care could result in my own death? All of it resurfaced with this pandemic. Jeff came home from one of those grocery store trips some weeks into the pandemic and shared with me how he'd been walking down an aisle and there was an older woman who needed some essential product, but it was on a shelf higher up and she couldn't get it by herself, and she was not even wearing a mask properly. But she stopped him not even inches apart, and invited him to help and get the thing she needed. And he did. And he came back home and related this experience to me, and immediately the first thing I think is, oh my God, the thing I pushed him to go do, what if he's sick now because of what I was pushing him to go do? And then I also noticed the beauty of what he had just shared with me. In spite of fear, even full well knowing the existence of fear, the existence of risk, he stepped into love and caring in that moment. Not because he wasn't afraid, despite it. He stepped into love and caring towards a stranger, someone he didn't even know. Fear, like grief, this thing that will build up structures around it when untended to. I began to see, and over the course of these 2 years of pandemic, I have seen more and more clearly, fear requires at least two things from us. One is a full and honest presence to it. I could say radical presence to it. And the other is framing or perspective. What are we paying attention to? This is the question I've come back to over and over again over the course of this pandemic. What are we paying attention to? What are we noticing? Which voices, which experiences, what are we letting into our body, our psyche, our physicality, our emotionality? What are we paying attention to, and what are we letting in? I think back to that unpresidential president who lied to us. Why? Because, oh, God forbid, that a global health crisis might look poorly, reflect poorly on him. So at every instance, from the beginning, you all remember this? It'll be over by Easter. Easter of 2020. This will all be over by Easter. And in the fear and self-obsession, creating division in this country. Division that didn't have to be. That was one global crisis, one that continues. We're in the midst of another with a different president, not perfect, but able to embody greater honesty and reflection. And we're approaching this current global crisis with a deeper sense of unity, not just unity nationally, global unity even. What happened 2 years ago did not have to happen in that way. The voices we listen to that frame things for us matter. What we pay attention to matters. It matters at the level of leadership. It matters, I've discovered in my own life, at the level of even what news outlets I'm paying attention to and listening. Things that I have considered historically reliable news outlets, even those commonly used by us who identify as progressive. Yes, sure, elements of journalism, but no longer journalism. Commentary on the news, emotional hooks, creating soap operas out of the news. Come back, we need our ratings. Get hooked. You know you want to keep following us. Not the same thing as journalism. Journalism becoming scarcer and scarcer to even find, though it exists. It does exist. What are we listening to? What are we paying attention to? I think about our community, how we've navigated this time. At the outset, from the very beginning, those amongst us, those who know how to sew or stitch or quilt, immediately, selflessly began making homemade masks and saying, take it, it's free. If you need one, take it. What, you need 10 or 15 more for your neighbors? We'll help out. Give me a week. I'll have those ready for you. From the beginning, in our community, there was no debate about whether collective care, communal care, matters or doesn't matter. We immediately made the changes and sacrifices that were necessary for collective care to bring it alive in the best and deepest way possible. This community, our community, which had no experience of doing things virtually, very little to no experience of it, within a 10-day period, two-week period, everything completely shifted out of an ethic and commitment to communal care, first and foremost. We, this community of Unitarian Universalists, seeing over the past 2 years, not just the public health crisis, but the tandem resurgence, the seeing more clearly of the need to focus on racial inequality in our country, the seeing and experiencing with greater clarity the exponential spiraling of climate-related devastation, our presence to those things becoming core priorities and commitments of this community. We have identified and said that among the purposes of our community is to speak to these needs and address the needs of our time. They are beautiful and necessary commitments. Honest presence, framing, perspective. Who are we listening to? What are we paying attention to? What are we letting in to ourselves? The story of Pandora's box is millennia old and still relevant. Still relevant because, as Gorman tells us, the box or vessel opening up is absolutely what will happen. It's inevitable. It's just part of the human experience that it is going to open up. And all those things are going to fly out. They have for centuries, for generation upon generation, all of our humanity flying out of the vessel uncontained, our frailties, our uncertainties, the tragedies encountered over and over again by different generations over centuries. And if we can understand that and accept that is part of the nature and flow, the ebb and flow of time and history, then as one of my spiritual teachers puts it, Meg Wheatley, she says, who do we choose to be? In the midst of that, who do we choose to be? There is choice. We can choose goodness. We can choose unity. We can choose compassion. We can choose possibility. We can choose love. We can choose interdependence. We can make these choices over and over again as often as they are needed. It is what the times we live in call for. It is what a world which we seem to just roll from one crisis to the next. It is what this world and this time needs. And it is who we, as Unitarian Universalists, are. Beloveds, please rise in body or spirit. As you go forth into this new week, may we each be a channel of that love and peace that resides in our heart, that commitment that we hold to be that, to bring that alive for ourselves and for others. Pay attention to your words, your deeds, your actions, how you are, who you're with, what you're letting in to yourself. For ultimately, over time, these choices have impact. They impact how we're able to show up. They impact how others experience us and what they take away from us. Be that bold, radical presence of love and caring that our world needs. Go forth and do that, and be that, knowing that you belong to a community of others who seek to do exactly that in the wider world until we are together again. Go with love, go with peace. Amen.